Hello all my yarny friends, I'm Sara Sach. Welcome back to my crochet channel. Now today's video, we are going to take all of our squares, they're 6-inch squares, from our 2024 Crochet Along. And what we did is we made 2 squares of each of the monthly squares. And then I did 6 additional squares. Okay, and we'll talk more about that when we get started. But I want to show you what I've got done so far. And this is the join that we're going to be doing to put our squares all together. It's different than I've done in the past. And I really love how it adds an extra bit of dimension. Now, what we're going to do on today's video, you're going to need a total of 30 squares. Okay, so we have 24 because we did 2 each month, and then I did 6 additional from this yarn here. And this is the yarn that I used to join all of my squares together. And that is this yarn here. It's called Scramble from SUNDANCE. I ordered this through Herrschners. And this is how it looks stitched up. And I really loved it because it had lots of different colors in it. The colorway is just called Rainbow. It is a medium weight number 4 acrylic yarns. And remember, we used all acrylic yarns, so you need to make sure that you're using an acrylic yarn to join your squares together. If you made these all in cotton or wool or whatever yarn fiber that you used, you need to make sure that you have the same yarn fiber to put your squares all together. Now I ordered 3 of these balls. Each one has 3.5 ounces, which is 164 yards. And I'm going to probably use 2.5. Okay, so I've already used almost 2 of them to join them together. So today is step 1. We're going to join our squares together, and I'm going to show you how to do that. And then on Wednesday, we're going to do step 2. And on step 2, I'm going to show you how to add just a basic trim around the edges, because it can be tricky when we have these portions where we closed up our squares to join them together. Okay, and it's just going to be a basic trim around the edge. And then on Friday, I'm going to show you how to do a nice fancy trim, not too fancy, but a nice one that goes really well with our blanket that we're doing. Now, if you've not been able to follow along with us this year, we made 2 squares each month using the monthly birthstone as our inspiration. And you can find all of these squares in that link that I'm going to put underneath this video. You can go to that link and it'll take you to the blog that has all of the links for all of the squares. You can also find all of the links in the Granny Square playlist here on YouTube. That way you can go and look at all the different squares that we used. You can use any 6-inch square for this project though. Like I said, 2 from each of our monthlies, and then I made 6 with my yarn that I'm using to join and do my trim with. And I wanted to do that. I wanted 30 squares for starters, but also I wanted to have some of just these solid squares so that I could just intersperse them in. Because what I did is I took all 30 of my squares, I put them in a container, and I just grabbed them as I'm hooking them together. I didn't even look, I just made sure I didn't have 2 of the same monthly squares together, but I just put them together however they landed, randomly. But you don't have to do it that way. You can do it however that you want. And like I said in the past, you can use whatever 6-inch squares you want. You could do it all with just 1 square that's your favorite. It's up to you. And also, you can use these squares for lots of different things. You can make scarves, you can make hats, you can make pillows, blankets, whatever that you want. Okay, so just to repeat myself, you can find all of the squares from our Crochet Along in the link that's underneath this video. You can also find the pattern that I used for the solid square. I put that also underneath this video. It'll just say solid square video link and you can click that link because I do have a video on the solid square as well. But you don't have to do a solid square. You could do a regular granny square. You can do whatever you want, as long as it's a 6-inch square. Okay, and then after you have your 30 squares made, we're going to hook them all together, and that's what we're going to do today for step 1. And so you're going to need the yarn that you've chosen. You could use a solid, ombre, whatever you have in your yarn stash. I just really like the idea of using this one because it had so many colors in it. And then the main color, of course, is this sort of creamy white color. It's kind of an off-white, more of towards the ivory. And this colorway is called Rainbow. Again, it is a medium weight number 4 acrylic yarn. And I'm sticking with acrylic because all of the yarns that I used on my blanket are acrylic. And you're going to need about 3 balls. Okay, and again, 3 balls have 3.5 ounces. So step 1, we're going to put all our squares together. Step 2, on Wednesday, we're going to make just a solid trim around the edge. And then on Friday, for Friday Fun Day, I'm going to show you how to do a really neat sort of fancy trim that's going to make this blanket just pop, but you could use it on any blanket or scarf or anything that you wanted to add a super fancy, but not too fancy, trim. All right, so we're going to use our H hook, which is a 5mm for all 3 steps. And all you need besides that is your scissors and a needle for weaving in those ends, because unfortunately we will have a few ends to weave in. All right, so go grab all your squares or get them all done and meet me back here and we'll put them together. So the way we're going to join our squares together is we're going to join them in a row of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And again, I just randomly chose them from my container. All right. And the way we're going to join them is we're going to take 2 of them with the wrong sides together, and we'll be stitching with the right sides facing out. Okay. And as we do this, we'll just continue to join until we have 6 squares together. All right, so let's get these 2 joined together. All right, so we're going to take 2 of our squares with the right sides facing out. And you will notice that when you put them together, you may have some that have more single crochets than the other. And so you'll have to ease that in a little bit, and I'll explain how to do that as we go along. All right, so I've got my yarn I'm going to use. We're going to grab our first square, and we'll go in that chain 1 space and pull that in and chain 1. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to go in that space and we're going to stitch 2 single crochets. 1, 2. All right, so we've stitched 2 single crochets in the chain 1 space. So now we're going to go over to this chain 1 space on the other square. And we'll stitch 2 single crochets. 1 and 2. All right, so we've stitched 2 single crochets in this corner and 2 in this corner. And we're going to try to line these up. All right, so we're going to come back to this first square. We're going to skip 2 and put 2 single crochets only in the front of this first square. And so now what we'll do on this side, we'll skip 2 single crochets and place 2 single crochets in the next stitch. And as you're working across, you may notice, like I said, this red one has more stitches than this white one. And so what we're going to do is we're going to skip 2 single crochets and stitch 2 single crochets in the next. But on the red one, I'm going to go ahead and skip 3. That way it keeps everything lined up. And so you'll have to kind of figure that out on your own to make sure everything lines up. All right, so we'll skip 2 over here and stitch 2 single crochets. 1 and 2. And then sort of eyeball it. So it looks like I need to skip 3 again on the red side. 1, 2, 3, and then we'll go over here. 1 and 2. All right, now if you want to do it a different way, because it doesn't really matter how many stitches you have across as long as your squares line up. So you may want to just skip 1 on this side when you're going back and forth. And then when you do the next one, on the red one, you'll only skip 2. Because the goal here is to line up your squares so they look pretty. And I want to show you how this looks. Stitch those 2 single crochets. Let's open this up. And this forms this fun little ridge. And it also has a little bit of like a, not curly, but ripply effect. All right? It's super fun, super easy, and it just looks really pretty. All right? So we start with 2 single crochets in the first corner of this one facing us. And then this one on the other side, we go over here and stitch 2 single crochets. And then we'll skip 2 and stitch on this one, skip 2, stitch on this one, and we're going back and forth, skipping 2 and stitching 2 single crochets. And again, you want your 2 squares to line up nicely. Now, on this beginning portion, you'll notice this doesn't line up exactly. But when we go to stitch that trim on, we'll ease it over and stitch that straight across. And we'll talk about that when we do step 2. All right, so just ease it over a little bit. Try to make sure everything's lined up as we stitch those 2 single crochets. And see, we're just going back and forth, skip 2, stitch 2 single crochets in the next. And again, you may have to only skip 1 or skip 3 in order to keep everything all lined up. All right, so now I'm in the corner, so I'm going to stitch 2 single crochets in this corner, and then I'll stitch 2 single crochets in this corner. All right, now go ahead and cut this. And what I have been doing is weaving these ends in as I go. Then I don't have to worry about it later. And it's real important. You go to the inside, and like I said, it's real important that you weave these ends in securely, because you don't want your blanket coming apart in the wash or even just being used. You know, you'd be really upset if your blanket started unraveling, okay? And so we're just going to weave that in. And I like to go weave it in, leave a nice sized tail there, and just weave it back and forth. And a lot of people like to wait till the end to weave in their ends. That's totally fine. I just like to do it as I go. I think of it as part of the process, I guess. All right, and clip that one off. I know a lot of people like to do the continuous join, and if you want to do that, I do have a video on that as well. It's in that Granny Square, Afghan Square playlist. I do have a video on how to do the continuous join, and it is a really neat way to do it, but I wanted something a little bit more special, so I messed around until I found something I really, really liked and thought went really well with this particular style of blanket. Because I sort of call this a crazy blanket because it has lots of different colors and lots of different styles, and we're putting them together to make one blanket. All right, and so what you're going to do, we stitch these 2 together. Isn't that fun? I just really love it. Okay, and then you'll continue to do this until you have 6 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and then you'll set that aside and do another 6 until you have 2 rows of 6. And then I'm going to show you now how to put 2 rows of 6 together. And it makes it a lot easier because we can just go straight across, adding them together. So I have 6 of my squares stitched together, and I have, you know, a large portion of the blanket made. and I'm ready to put another row of 6 on. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we'll just line up our edges the same. And again, you're going to have to work to make sure that your squares all line up, because again, when you're working across, you may have some that don't line up perfectly. And you'll have to maybe skip 1 or skip 2 exactly the same way. Now remember, we're putting the right sides out and working on the front of our work. And the main thing is to work from square to square. So we'll start with the first 2, then we'll do the next 2 and the next 2. If you want to clip these, a really neat thing that you can use, and I like to use these, is this. This is used for holding your stitches in knitting, but it will also help you keep things lined up if you want to do something like that. And it makes it a little easier. It's not, I mean, you don't have to, but it will make it a little easier in keeping your squares lined up and help it not be quite so clumsy. And I just kind of take it and put it on those 2 where we joined them together. And a safety pin works good. Hair clips work good. Even those clips you use to hold your chips closed, they work good. Anything that you want to use to keep your edges and your squares together. I even have this great big safety pin here. This will work just fine also. Whatever you want to use. And I just marked the middle 3, and I think that helps enough. You know, you can even put a stay stitch in there that can be pulled out, you know, rather quickly. Whatever you want to use to keep your squares lined up. And we're basically going to do this the same that we did when we joined all the individual squares. Okay, and so we'll do it exactly the same. We'll come in, whoops, I went in the wrong spot there, that chain 1 space, grab our yarn, and now we're going to stitch 2 single crochets in that corner in the first square facing us. Then we'll grab this one, making sure we got the front out, and go to that chain 1 space in the corner there. There we go, get my yarn where it belongs. And stitch those 2 single crochets. Then we'll hold them together. We'll skip 2 on the front and stitch 2 single crochets, 1 and 2. Then we'll go to the back and just keeping things lined up, 1, 2. And remember, you may have to skip 1 or 2 or 3 depending on how many single crochets you have around the edge of your square, because remember, some squares have more stitches than others. And I usually go, you know, about halfway, check it out. I can see this square is bigger, and so I'm just going to skip 1 on the front, put my 2 single crochets in, see how that lines up. Okay, then I'll go to the back. I'll go ahead and just skip 2 on that back square. Then on the front one, I'm just going to skip 1 again and stitch my 2 single crochets. Okay, I'm liking how it's looking, but I still think I probably ought to skip 3 on that back stitch because that square is bigger. Okay, because we want our corners to line up. That's the most important thing here. And I think we've got everything lined up. And that's the key to getting your blanket to lay nice, is to make sure that your squares are lined up nicely. All right, so now I'm over here. Let's see, skip 2, that puts me in the corner. So I'm going to go in that corner where I stitched that, where we stitched it together. And I'm going to do that on this side as well. Look, find it, and make sure I'm in the right spot. All right, now we have this little section here where we stitched it together. So what you're going to do is you're going to go in that side of that stitch on the front and stitch 2 single crochets. Then you'll go in that back portion where we stitched those 2 single crochets, and then you'll come to where The first one is on the next square, stitch 2 single crochets, and then you'll do that on the back square. And that's how you get those edges joined together when we're joining our squares, okay? And then we're on to the next square. And we want to do the same thing. Skip 2, stitch 2 single crochets. Then we'll skip 2 over here. 1, see, that's where we stitch, so 1, 2. And we'll watch it along to see how it's going to line up. This one looks like it's lining up rather nicely. 1, 2. So we're skipping 2 and single crocheting into 2 single crochets in the next, and if we need to skip more or less, we will. Okay? And I'm a little past halfway, so I'm going to check it. I'm going to go ahead and take out this safety pin here. Actually, it's a knit stitch holder. Just going to take it out, see how it lays up. Everything looks pretty good, but you can see it's a little bit more on this side. So what I'm going to do on the front is just skip 1 and stitch my 2 single crochets, and then I'll go on the back side, 1, 2, just skip 2, and I'll look at it and see how that's laying. There we go. All right, so I'll skip my 2 on the front. And it seems like things are lined up nicely. So sometimes just a little bit of an adjustment can help it lay nice. All right, and we're coming back up to the next corner here. All right, and so we'll do the same thing. We'll go in that corner and stitch 2 single crochets on the front one. Then we'll go to the back one here and stitch 2 single crochets. Then we'll go in this and stitch 2 single crochets, that last stitch of where we joined, and then 2 single crochets on this side. And depending on where it's laying, if you feel comfortable putting another extra one in there, you can. I didn't feel like it was necessary. And then I'll go to that corner on the front square and then the corner on the back square where we added that joining in. Okay, all right, so let's take a look at that. And see, here's our first square. And then here's where we did our join stuff. Then we did the next square. And see how it's all like bumpy? I just love how it turned out. It just gives it such fun. And I think that's kind of what goes along with our squares, is this is a fun blanket or a fun afghan. And I think this is a really fun stitch. All right, and so you'll just continue what we did across here, all across your row. I have joined these 2 rows together using that stitch all the way across, making sure that all of my squares line up. And I know a lot of you who like exact numbers of stitches, this would be a little bit wonky for you, because I'm kind of like that too. I want my everything to line up. But what you have to do is just ease it in there. It's worth it to spend a little bit more time concentrating on making your squares even. And that was another reason I talked a lot about when you're making these squares to go ahead and block them if you can, because when you're easing them together, if they're blocked more crisp, it makes this part easier. All right, and so we've stitched all 6 of the 2 rows together, and we went all the way down, so that's less weaving in. Okay, and so I'm at the end of this row, so I'm going to cut that yarn, and then I'll weave this in. And you're going to want to do this until you have all 30 of your squares together. So you'll have 6 squares on each row, and then you'll have 5 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it'll be 6 by 5. Now, this is the size that I'm making. But of course, if you made a whole bunch more squares and you want to intersperse them all over the place and make it bigger and bigger and bigger, you certainly can. Add as many squares as you want. You could make it 8 by 8. You could make it 10 by 12. Whatever amount of squares that you want to do. I do recommend that you do them in rows like I did, and then put your rows together. And I really love how all the colors of this yarn worked out, because I've got teals going this way, I've got greens going this way, I've got orange, I've got pink, yellow going all over, but still it makes it all cohesive and work together. All right, and so this is what step 1 is putting all of our squares together. And if you get it together and you're not happy with it and you want to choose a different, or maybe you're working with it and you're just like, I just don't really like that, you can choose a different way of joining all your squares together. I just really liked this for this blanket because it's an assorted blanket, all different colors, all different types of squares, and I just think it works beautifully with this particular style of blanket. All right, and again, if you want that continuous join, I do have a video on that, and you can find that in the Afghan Squares, Crochet Squares YouTube playlist that I have. Okay, and so this is our homework assignment for today. To get all your squares together in your blanket. And then on Wednesday, for step number 2, we're going to do a trim around the edge and how to make it even and get it all ready and set up for the fancy trim that we're going to do on Friday. So again, this is a 3-step process. Today we joined our squares. Wednesday we're going to put a regular trim on, or edging I should say, and then on Friday we'll add the fancy trim. All right, so get busy and also have a lot of fun, because I really enjoyed putting all my squares together and how they all landed in interesting places.